Hello everyone and welcome to tonight's Artist Loft class titled Figure Drawing 101, Sketching a Figure in a Landscape. I'm your instructor Adrienne Hodge and I'm excited about this class because it is, even though it's a standalone free class, it is technically part one in a three-part class if you are so inclined to sign up for our next two premium classes. And our lovely moderator can drop the links to those classes that are coming up on the calendar in the next couple of weeks. They are watercolor classes on painting a figure in a landscape, and we'll be using the same reference images from tonight's class. So if you want to just take advantage of the free class tonight on sketching a figure in a landscape, then that's obviously great. And I'll be referring back to this class in the next 2 weeks in that premium class. But if you want to sign up for those two premium classes, there's going to be a lot of really amazing content in those two classes and addressing a lot of things that come up for a lot of artists when we are working with watercolor and working with two very popular subjects, a figure and a landscape, and the figure and the landscape together, and how those two things interact in a drawing and a painting. So tonight we'll be addressing it in a drawing and sketching, and we'll be sketching it a few different ways. We're going to be using this reference image, which should have been attached to the supply list and just give me a thumbs up if you were able to access the reference images. Okay, I see a couple thumbs up, so that means they were there and they were accessible. Okay, so we've got the color version of this photograph, we've got the black and white version of this photograph, and then we have the same photograph again, only the light is inverted. So in an inverted light photograph, all of the dark values in the image are light, and all of the light values in an image are dark. And if you've been following along with all of my Artist Loft classes from the past year, well, more than a year now, since July of 2021, then you know that I really love an inverted light photograph. I think it's very helpful because value is so important in a work of art. If you're trying to render from life and make something look realistic, then noticing what the light is doing is so important. And oftentimes folks really struggle with just seeing the value shapes that I talk about so much. And so looking at a photograph where the light has been inverted like that, it just kind of makes it easier for your brain to wrap around what that dark shape is doing, because the dark shape will appear light. And so it's easier to see it somehow. So we'll be using those reference photos tonight for this class, and then also in those two premium classes. So if you've already printed them out, then you're ready to go. You just need to get your watercolors ready and sign up for those two premium classes that are coming up on the horizon. And the premium classes are much smaller since there's a small fee attached to the class. So it's usually a smaller group than the free classes, and so the pace is a little slower, a little more intimate. So yeah, hopefully get some folks from tonight to join for those premium classes. All right, I'm gonna switch over to my tabletop view and just talk about the rest of the supplies on the supply list. But before I do that, don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michael's or Michael's classes, and follow or tag me at Adrienne Hodge Art. I saw somebody say in the chat they didn't get the inverted photo. Can I get a thumbs up? Was the inverted photo on the supply list? Or I mean, included with tonight's? It's possible that is only going to be included with the premium classes. Well, I will definitely put it on the screen if anybody wants to, grab a a screenshot of it real quick. You can also easily invert a photo on your phone. There's a fun trick some high schoolers taught me a few years ago when I was a high school art teacher. If you have an iPhone and you just take your iPhone and press the bottom button, or I assume it would work even with a newer iPhone. I know I've got an older one. But if you press that button 3 times, it will invert everything on your phone, like your entire screen will be inverted. So it's very easy to invert a photograph. There's always also a number of apps that will do it. I like this free app called Fonto. It's Phonto, like a combination of photo and fonts, because you can add text over the image, and you can invert an image on that app. You can invert an image on Photoshop. It's very easy to do. If you have this photograph, you can easily get yourself an inverted version of it. All right. Also, just want to make note of the fact that even though I include reference images in a lot of my classes, I try to base my instruction on the idea that you can apply everything we're doing tonight to your own reference photos. So don't feel like using the exact same reference photo as me is completely necessary. In fact, I encourage you to use your own reference photos, because you know, it'll be a little more challenging that way. Okay, so always try not to look at the chat too much and let the moderator handle it, but I saw that pop up and just wanted to address it since I said it was there, and then it appears it maybe was not. Okay, so yeah, tag your work with those hashtags and follow or tag me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art if you're so inclined. Sometimes people do lovely work from these classes and post on Instagram, but then I don't see them because they get buried in those hashtags. And but if you tag me directly, then I'm, you know, obviously gonna see it a little easier. And I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art. And here's some of my work. I'm always flashing on my business cards here of my ethereal skyscapes that I do using primarily calligraphy ink. If you want to go check those out, or all the other work that I do on Instagram, please do so. All right, so we're using the Artist Loft sketching pencils, the 12-piece set. We're going to have an Artist Loft illustration brush pen. And the brush pen is very handy for what we're going to do tonight, sketching this image. A ruler is kind of optional, but you might want to grab a ruler. And then I've got the larger sketching pad here. It's the 11 by 14, and it's upside down because I'm left-handed, so I like to draw with the the wire on the right side there for me. Okay, so yeah, like I said, I want you to be able to apply everything we're doing tonight to your own reference photos, but I'm going to be using, you know, you're obviously welcome to follow along using this reference photo as well. So this is a photograph of my daughter, Elliot. She is 9 years old, and she was very not jealous, but you know, maybe had a little bit of FOMO of the fact that we drew her little brother a few months back in a portrait drawing class, and she was like, he got to be famous through the Michaels classes. So I told her I would make her famous. What do we have, 141 people in the class tonight? That's pretty famous, right? So if you guys do this portrait using this photograph of my daughter, please do tag me or send it to me at Adrienne Hodge Art so I can be sure to. Oh, and actually my name is, my handle is on the Zoom there, so I don't need to pull my Post-it back out. So yeah, tag me so that I can show her and she'll be very pleased. Okay, so I have been teaching adults for a very long time. I guess coming up on 10 years teaching adults, and I've been teaching I used to teach middle school, I've taught high school, but I've mostly taught adults for my art teaching career. And I get a lot of folks in painting and drawing classes bringing in family photographs like this, where it's a figure in a landscape and the figure is kind of small or maybe only taking up, a small portion. Like I could, put my eraser on there. Maybe if I had a couple of erasers, I could cover up Elliot and we would mostly have a landscape here. So her face is very small. The figure is definitely a focal point or an interest in the image, but it's not taking up most of the space in the image. The landscape is taking up a lot of the space. But since it is, like a family photograph of a loved one, typically, I see a lot of that in my painting and drawing classes throughout the years. The focus, it ends up being on the figure or on the portrait, but somehow the landscape or the focus ends up being a little too much on the landscape and the figure suffers. So either the focus is on the figure and the landscape suffers, or vice versa. And oftentimes there will be this inclination to want to make the figure appear bigger, and then that's not really, nothing changes in the landscape to account for it. So then proportions can be off. The figure could appear much larger than the landscape that it's interacting with, etc. So there's a lot of pitfalls that I see people fall into when drawing or sketching or painting a photograph like this. And so I'll be addressing that throughout tonight's class and in those 2 premium classes. And since I keep bringing it up, let me just put on the screen the image from the class that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. I should have had it handy, and I don't see it right there on the side of my desk, but it's on the advertisement for those premium classes, the painting, and I showed it last week, but I don't want to pause to grab it for too long. Okay, well, but yeah, in the painting as well, we're not going to maybe necessarily in a 2-hour class fully complete the painting of the photograph, but we're really going to focus on kind of this area the most, like the area of the figure and the landscape around it, this transitional area. So a transition in a work of art is where one subject is in the image is touching another subject in the image. So the transition between the foreground, the middle ground, and the background, the transition between these leaves that are hanging over and the middle ground trees that are a little farther away, they all exist on this same plane in the image, but we want to show, the distance between that, the depths of what's happening there. And I address all that in my landscape studies class that we had back in July, and Carrie, our moderator, can drop that in the chat if you missed that one. So, we've definitely had a lot of classes that have covered landscapes. We've had some classes that have covered figures, and there's going to be a lot more figure drawing classes going forward. But tonight's class is going to be about sketching this figure and proportions, but also making the figure exist in relationship to the landscape around it in a way that visually makes sense. Okay, so the way that we're going to do that is through a lot of thumbnail sketching tonight. So we maybe will not have, a detailed, drawing necessarily. That's why I said sketching the figure tonight, because we're going to do a lot of just very loose little thumbnail sketches of this image or whatever image you're using, and focus on those things in those transitional areas, but you're possibly not going to have a super developed drawing, like to put in a frame by the end of it here. Okay, so I'm going to go to a blank page in my sketchbook, and I'm going to be using a darker pencil, a heavier pencil, but I advise you to use a lighter pencil for sketching. So a 2H or a 4H, or even a 2B would be good for sketching these thumbnails. And then if you want to grab your darker pencils to fill in the darker values, the only reason I'm using a 6B is so that my lines will show up on the screen. I've learned the hard way that if I sketch with the pencil that I want you to be using, then my lines will not show up. So on the Zoom. Okay, so a thumbnail sketch is something we've also done in several classes up until now. And if you're not familiar, it's just a small sketch, a small box, and that's what the ruler is for. If you want to go ahead and use your ruler to draw the boxes, you can, or if you want to just freehand sketch them, you can. And actually, I just remembered the other reason I wanted you to have the ruler. Just kidding. You should have a ruler. It's not optional. Grab your ruler, or if you don't have a ruler, here's what else you can do. Here's a trick, because we're not going to really necessarily be using the measurements. In numerical measurements doesn't matter so much here. Let me just grab a piece of scrap paper. So if you grab a piece of scrap paper instead of a ruler, I'm just going to tear a little strip out of the back of my sketchbook. You don't even need a ruler for this. What we're going to do is we're going to measure Elliot's head. I was like, why did I say a ruler for the thumbnails? And then I'm like, oh, right, because we're going to measure for body proportions here. Okay, so we measure the human body based on head lengths, and then we measure the rest of after we get the measurement of the head length, we use the head length to measure that against the rest of the body. And I always think of other classes I want to reference that I didn't tell our moderator to grab beforehand, but we had a class on basic body proportions back in February, I believe, using the wooden mannequin. And I think that class was called Basic Body Proportions and Capturing Bodies in Movement. If you search Artist Loft and body proportions, that should come up pretty quickly. And the premium class that we had a couple weeks ago definitely talked about this using reference images of a model, and there will be several premium classes coming up using reference images of a model that I collected, where we will continue to talk about figure drawing. But all you really need to know is we're going to take this piece of paper and we're going to measure from the crown of the head to the chin. And I realize that her head is tilted a little bit here. So we're going to kind of start from like the center of the crown of the head, which would be right here. So like where you would balance a book on your head. If you were going to put a book on your head, that's the spot that we're measuring from there to the chin. And you can mark that on your piece of paper. And so now we've just created our one head length measurement. So that's one head, right? So you can do that with the ruler, or you can do it with a scrap of paper. And so on the ruler, it is just over an inch. It's about 1.25 inches of an inch for the head length. Okay, and then if Elliot was standing up with her arms stretched out, you know, standing and looking straight forward, then we would have, you know, like we're looking at the wooden mannequin here, our second head length would fall around, well, this is talking about an adult body proportion, but we've got a child here, right? So the body proportions on a child are much different than the body proportions of an adult, and they vary. When we had the body proportions class, someone asked, what is the difference between, you know, is there like a standard model for children's body proportions? And I think I got a little stumped in the middle of that class, and then later I answered it in the Q&A. I used to do Q&As on Instagram after these classes, and I said, there isn't a standard model because children are constantly growing. Their body proportions are constantly changing. I mean, you have kids, you're constantly sizing up, with the clothes, and they're outgrowing their pants and their t-shirts, and their neck holes of their t-shirts, might get too small before the length of the shirt does, because their heads are everything's growing. So, but we're just going to use this head length to basically measure, even though she's got her body really curled up here, just to see how she's not really taking up that much space as we might think. Okay, so if we measure one head length from the chin, and you could do this in inches too, you could just measure, well, how many inches, of space is she taking up in the photograph as well. But we're going to use the head length measurement since it's the standard for measuring body proportions. So one head length from, the crown of her head. And if you wanted to even measure from like back here where the back of her head is showing to her chin, you could do that as well. But just to not confuse myself, I'm going to do it that way. And then from the chin to, just making a kind of a straight line down, it hits right there, just above or right in the center of her kneecaps. Okay. And then from the center of her kneecaps, that's it. I'm already into the wood here in her, or no, I'm right there at where her feet, her shoes are touching this log. Okay. And then we're just going to notice all the negative space now, and maybe even draw like a bit of a bubble or a box around the entire figure in the photograph, and see where all of these things connect. So this is my box that contains Elliot in the image. It's a pretty small box compared to the overall photograph. So just noticing, we're just noticing and looking, and we're taking steps here that I don't see a lot of folks do in a typical painting drawing class before they get started, and I'm all for just going for it, but I also think looking is a huge part of the art process if you're trying to render things realistically like you see them in nature. Okay, so within that box, we're looking at the negative space here, and we can see that, what lines up. Like her elbow is very lined up with this tree. The straight line that I drew is going straight through that tree. So I can really use the negative space between this tree and her arm to really help me with body proportions. And I can use this negative space shape between the tree and the tree. This tree where it meets the ground is perfectly in line with this line where the tips of her fingers are on this log where it's reaching out. So I really studied this photograph beforehand and noticed, this perfect box and how it lines up and can really help us. And then we've got this negative space shape up here between the back of her head on that tilt, and all of that is lined up with the line of that tree. And then over here we've got this big negative space shape again, and then there's a little keyhole right here between her knees and her arm. So we're kind of, I don't think this is cheating, and I've said this in the body proportions classes that we've done so far. When I do stuff like this, like, use everything you have at your disposal in the drawing process, in the drawing and painting process to, help you see what you're trying to make happen. Because why not? I don't think there's any such thing as cheating. Okay, so first of all, we're just going to sketch her. We're just going to separate her from, since she is where our attention is going to be, and then we're going to put her in the landscape. So we're going to kind of like do a little cutout zoom in of just her figure. Okay, so we're just going to sketch a rectangle just like we just drew that rectangle around her. Okay, and so imagine this is that line of that tree. And then we're just going to sketch a little kind of connect the dots here based on our negative space. And we could also break this up into thirds, which if you checked out that class on landscape studies, I talked about composition and the rule of thirds. And I'm not measuring this exactly here. I'm just sketching like a general grid, breaking up this box into thirds because I'm all about approximations and not making things exactly perfect. Okay, so using our little grid, we can make a little connect the dots that the back of her head comes into the second square right about there. The side of her hair where it's kind of indenting there into you know, her neck space is like around here, and then her shoulders very hunched into that space as well. Got this little triangle shape of negative space happening here, and I'm just ignoring the t-shirt and just looking at the figure because her shirt kind of has a little cute like split right there where it opens up, but I don't want to worry about that too much right now. Okay, and then the elbow comes right in line with the edge of our box, and then right about here is where the
Adrian,
arm
somebody
comes
asked, how tall is she by the ruler?
in. Oh, let's measure her with the ruler.
Mm-hmm.
From the back of her head to where her shoe disappears right there is, I mean, this is on my printout. It's going to be different, you know, depending on how you print it out. But in my particular printout here, I've got just over 3 inches, so 3 inches and a quarter. And then the box that I drew is not quite 3.5, just a 1/4 inch shy of 3.5 inches. So yeah, you could do that as well. You could really measure that box and you could get very precise and make a grid to help you. I plan to at some point have a class on using a grid. So far I've used a grid in a very loose way like this, but I haven't had a class that really breaks down grid drawings, but they are extremely helpful. I do have some resources online if you Google me or look me up on YouTube, search my name. I've done some other stuff, like just a very brief little 3-minute video on grid drawing. Not for Michael's though, so anyway, okay, so we've got that side of the figure sketched in there, and then on the other side here, just looking at that big negative space shape, and I'm not worried too much about proportions right now. I'm just gonna let the negative space guide me around and see this silhouette. I'm looking for the silhouette and I'm looking for the negative space. Just we're practicing our looking here. So I got this big negative space shape and I'm seeing how that looks within my little square or my rectangle. Okay, and then we've got this little keyhole space right here. Let's see. Actually, I'm going to draw the knees first and then come back to that one. So this is a little bit more of a wonky shape, but I love doing this, like asking what other thing could we label this organic shape that we're trying to draw? And it kind of looks like an oven mitt to me, right? Here's the thumb, and then here's the big space like an oven mitt. And we can adjust things her proportions later. Okay, so we've got that. And then we've got the little keyhole space right about there. Okay, that's looking pretty good, honestly. Pretty happy with that. Okay, and then we're just going to shade in the positive space using a diagonal hatching line and just see how that feels. And if it looks super wonky and is not cutting the same negative space or, you know, positive space shape as her figure in the landscape right there, then try that exercise again. You can always watch the recording of this later on YouTube and, you know, go back and try that multiple times. Okay, so now we're going to try to put that silhouette in the landscape and do the same thing with the landscape, and notice how her, I'm going to actually do it on the same page as that example right there. Notice how, you know, her positive space is interacting with the positive space in the landscape itself. And then we're just going to do this a few different ways in the time that we have. Same sort of thing, a couple of different ways. Okay, so we're going to draw another box. Now this is the box for the whole photograph. And in the premium classes coming up, excuse me, I got the little gnat buzzing around my face. I probably am going to zoom in a little bit more than I did in that example, just because I know when I was doing the painting example that you see in the advertisement for the class that I possibly spent more than 2 hours on it. And I want to make sure that I get to everything. So I'm probably going to zoom in on a chunk of this photograph, like more like this, like pretty much what's visible in the on the screen right now, instead of getting, you know, everything at the top and the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on her a little bit here as well. So I'm just going to draw the box that she takes up in the image in the way that I plan to, you know, zoom in a little bit more. So let's do like that. Okay. And then within that shape, we're gonna go ahead and get this tree in here first, since this tree was so important. Remember, it goes right to the bottom of the box. And you're welcome to, if you come to the premium class or right now, you know, zoom in or zoom out as much as you want on this photograph, and, you know, make your box bigger or fill the whole page if you don't want to do the thumbnail. Okay, so I'm just sketching the loose shape of the tree. Let me draw a little darker. A very loose shape of this one tree right here that's behind her, that's in the middle ground. And then there's some branches and leaves in the foreground that are overlapping that tree. So I'm going to go ahead and put those in there so that I'm accounting for something in the foreground, in the middle ground, and the background. I'm going to notice where the sidewalk behind her cuts into the image behind that tree. So right about here. And then let's see, if I'm cropping it like that, how much of that tree, like this background tree, is going to actually be visible? Might be just a tiny bit, like do the little tree line in the background, and then there's that big tree, which that big tree is very much in line. It's almost like it's coming out of the top of her head. So We can always move these things around later if we need to. It's just a thumbnail sketch. Okay. Right. And then just below her where her feet, you know, stop is this log that comes into the square, the rectangle a little bit. I keep calling it a square, even though it's a rectangle. And her hand is right on it. And that's what creates this little keyhole negative space. So we want to make sure that we've got that little keyhole of negative space between the side of the tree. So notice how as we're bouncing around, we're not treating the figure like it's anything special, you know? We're just, it's an object in the frame. And we're just guiding ourselves around by all of the forms, the three-dimensional forms that we're seeing in this frame. And it's good to kind of go work your way from the background forward. So notice how I really focused on what was in the background before I started layering anything on top of it from the foreground. I just wanted to make sure to mention the little foreground leaves here because I wanted to make sure I got those in the frame a little bit. But otherwise, we want to work from our background and then forward. So I'm not really worried about her even until I get to the middle ground because she is in the middle ground, right? She is farther away from me than this log, right? I took the photograph standing several feet in front of this, you know, playground structure, this pile of wood. And so this is closer to me than her, right? Okay, so now we can kind of put that little silhouette in here and we're going to do it the same way we did before, just looking at the negative space. And we're not committing to anything yet. We're working general to specific. Keeping it very general until we have everything accounted for, and then we can get more specific. But we're really not going to get super specific in this sketching class. We will get more specific in the premium classes when we're painting this. But tonight we're just basically we're prepping for the painting. Oh, I think I made her figure a little too scrunched up here. I got to adjust. Okay, where did I go wrong? I made her head too wide. I didn't make that space, that negative space big enough. And I just realized the keyhole space here is actually much bigger than that. You can even like fill in on the photograph, you know, fill in the negative space, or this is where the inverted light photograph can be so helpful. It's a little easier to see those shapes, I think, in the negative. Just saw it pop up on the screen saying, why is this so hard to do? It's so hard because we are people. And when we're drawing people, I've thought about this over the years, like, why do our brains break down? Like if we were drawing a still life right now, would this be as hard or as tricky? And I think it's because we don't have the sentimental attachment to a bowl of fruit or the need to make a bowl of fruit feel seen. And, you know, we want to make this subject in the photograph, especially, you know, when it's somebody precious to you, like this is my daughter, you know, I want her to feel seen. I want, you know, it to turn out well so that the audience member that is her, or if you're, you know, working of a photo from a photograph of someone who is precious to you, you want that person to feel, you know, seen and appreciated when they see this work of art that you're making from them. And, you know, and then we want the landscape. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a landscape, there's a figure, there's so much. So that's why I want you to kind of disconnect from the figure as a figure and think of it more as just shapes and light and value. So the more we can kind of stop seeing her as a little, you know, a child, and just see her as like, you know, this pile of wood, even though that feels weird to say. You know, the pile of wood is maybe a little easier because, you know, we don't have that same sort of sentimental attachment to a pile of wood, although I feel very deeply about trees, so I do have a need to make the trees feel seen. Anyway, okay, so speaking of the wood, let's notice the contours of the wood, how they are, all these wood logs are cylinders. So we've had tons of classes where we've talked about cylinders, and, you know, notice which ones are overlapping each other, which are going in front, but try not to get too bogged down on them. I would maybe pick like 3 or 4 that stand out the most to you, like, you know, these 2 that are overlapping, this one, and this one's, that's 5 of them, and sketch those pieces of wood and really notice what the contours are doing. So they are wrapping around on the, you know, each axis is a curved line on the, you know, where the rounded part of the log is, and then it's straight lines. Usually I say vertical and horizontal, but these are all pointing different directions. So, you know, where it's round, you're going to have a curved line, and then where it's straight, think about straight lines. And so those contours will really help you to grasp the 3 dimensions of those forms. And then we can take, if you haven't already been using a heavier pencil, like I told you not to, then you can grab your heavier pencil and we'll go ahead and shade in some of the super dark areas that we're seeing here. And I am aware of the time and that there were a couple other ways I wanted to approach this that we haven't gotten to just yet. So look at where the darkest values are happening, and you can use that same diagonal hatching line to fill in the, like, all the dark values. So look at the inverted light photo. Everywhere that it is searing white, that's where you've got almost black on your value scale from 0 to 10. And for anybody who's unsure about value scales or contour lines, a great class that I feel like I refer back to so much in all of these classes, the very first class we ever had in this series called Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms, where I talk about contour lines and the sketching pencils and the optimal way to use the sketching pencils. We've had countless classes in over a year now on value, but if you search Artist Loft and value, there's a number of classes on that. So I'm just looking at where are the darkest darks, like where is my 10, my absolute black on the value scale. And I see, you know, just in this photograph where all the white is, so I can sketch in some little patchy moments of black where I'm seeing those shadows, or you can use the black and white photo and see where all that black is standing out. You could go ahead and even shade her in a little darker in all the places where the dark values are happening, and start to get her figure to come across Okay, I haven't really broken down her figure and as much as I wanted to yet, so I'm gonna do that really quickly here using the sketch that I already had, and then we're gonna sketch her again with the brush pen really quick, and then that's gonna be all the time that we have. So basically, I just want to sketch her again using basic shapes here, so ovals, rectangles, cylinders, and circles. Just like we would, we're basically going to turn her into a wooden mannequin here. So looking at this photograph, we've got the egg shape for the head, and that head is on a tilt. And I am going to go a little quickly here just because of the time. The crown of the head is completely visible, so you can see that little crossbar for the crown of the head. Eyes are halfway down on the head. So we're going to do another little crossbar there for the eyes that are dipping down. And then we've got the nose and the mouth. And do just a very brief little mannequin here. And this is not going to be perfect. But then I want to notice where the relationship is of the back of the shoulders to the head. And it's right about there. And then I'm looking at, like, I'm turning it into a very simplified version of the form. So I'm going to do kind of a diamond shape here. For the torso. And then notice where the knees come up in relationship to the torso, and we could use our head measurements again right here, or I'm just going to draw a couple of circles for the knees. Okay. And then we can see circles for the arm or the shoulders are there. The circle for the elbow is going to be a little higher than the circle for the knees. The other elbow is right in line with the knees. The circle for the wrist right about here. We're going to use this big shape that you see on the wooden mannequin for the hand. And then we can connect those cylinders. So think about how this is all, a curved line. So this is another way to sketch her within the figure or whatever figure in a landscape that you are drawing. Break it down into these very basic shapes. And then if you want to put the hair in there just to help you see it a little better. Okay, so that's a very basic way of looking at it. All right, and then the last thing I wanted to do, we have 10 minutes, is sketch the figure in the landscape using a brush pen. And that is just another way to kind of train your brain to simplify the forms and to notice what the value is doing, and again to try to get the figure to feel like it is proportionate to the value. So as long to the landscape. So as long as the figure isn't just like taken up, I definitely kind of changed things a little bit here. I think I lifted her head a little bit, a few times when I sketched it, I wasn't quite nailing the proportions of how she was interacting with the landscape, which was why I think it was important to sketch it so many times, and why I advise you to do the same thing, so that you really just, the more you sketch it, the more you're going to notice what might be missing. Another exercise to help to prepare for a more detailed drawing or painting of a figure in a landscape would be to do some blind contours of the drawing. And I think that's a great way, or of the image. And that's a great way to loosen up and warm up before any more detailed drawing or painting. So I'm just gonna not look at, and I'll do this with my brush pen. I'm gonna not look at my hand that's drawing, and I'm going to just look at the photograph. And I'm gonna look for those shapes of values that we're talking about, the shapes of shadows. So her hair, and actually I'm gonna use the inverted one. So the shapes of her hair, shapes of the value in the knees, arms. I'm not looking at my paper. I'm doing a blind contour sketch right now. I'm just looking at the image. And then notice the shapes of the trees and those logs, like really just get that communication going. A blind contour sketch is not about the product. It's about the communication between your eyes and your drawing hand. And the more you look and notice and practice these shapes, you're gonna see things come across in this blind sketch that you maybe weren't capturing in the other one. I know that looks kind of crazy to look back at it, but I can see like, oh yeah, there's the hair. This is the tree. Okay, so I don't want to get too attached to this, but it's hard not to. I want to fill in those darker values, but I think you can see it coming across. You get the gist. Okay, so now let's sketch it with the brush pen. Do another little thumbnail. And yeah, thumbnail sketches can be as detailed or as loose and sketchy as you want them to be. But basically I'm just looking at that negative space again. I'm trying to get an understanding of what all of the forms and values are doing in this photograph. And I think it's so important to spend a lot of time before you get started on a more detailed painting or drawing, just sketching like this and just practicing and not having any attachment to these practice sketches, to, you know, really just get as firm of an understanding of what it is you're painting or drawing before you know, begin doing anything that you're going to have more of an attachment to. So in the premium class, we're going to go step by step through this image and sketch it out on watercolor paper. Then I'm going to create a palette of you know, the skin tones and the colors that I'm seeing in the landscape. And we're going to just go step by step, filling in washes and layers to creating this portrait of a figure in a landscape that could easily be applied to any figure in a landscape. And the focus is really going to be on making the figure feel like it's interacting with the landscape and connected to it, and not just, you know, a figure with a blurred background or a background with a blurred figure. Because I see a lot of that in my painting classes, and I know a lot of our sketches feel that way right now, but hopefully the understanding of connecting these two subjects together has come across tonight. Okay, I definitely felt a little rushed with the brush pen thing, but that's another really great exercise to practice. And, you know, with this particular figure, noticing just how scrunched up she is and how much of her figure is not visible is the most helpful here. So sketching that silhouette, I think, was the best way to grasp that. And yeah, spend some time noticing the contours of all of the other interesting parts of this photograph if you're, you know, going to delve deeper into this photograph, and that would be the contours on the wood, the trees in the background, and these leaves hanging down in the foreground. Okay, well, we are almost out of time. I'd love to see some of y'all's sketches from tonight. If you want to hold up your sketchbook and have Carrie spotlight you so we can see your sketches. I love to use the word studies a lot because we basically were just, you know, breaking this down and studying this image tonight. Oh, very nice. Yeah, I like how you're shading in those darker values. And I love seeing some notes there as well. Hold up your sketch. We've got, I'm not sure, Sam, we've got you spotlighted. Oh, but we didn't see your sketch. Okay. James, very nice. Yes, love how loose it is, James. And I love that you're getting the logs and the trees in there just as much as the figure. All right, nice. We've got a little grid action there. Ooh, that one's very strong. Yes. Look at that silhouette and that background. That makes me feel like I did my job. Oh, yes. And that one too. Oh, that's very strong. Yes. Just keep going and being patient with that. That is, yes, that's amazing. Very nice. I love the pen marks there. Love the different stylized quality that always shows up in all of our examples in these classes. Oh, that was it? Okay. Well, thank you guys for sharing. And if we didn't get to spotlight you, feel free to tag me or just send it to me, you know, on Instagram or email if you'd like. I'm always happy to see sketches, and I know my daughter Elliot will love to see all of these sketches of her, and especially from the premium class, and hopefully I'll see a lot of you in those premium classes over the next 2 weeks, and I'm excited to see how this process develops. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening.